Foods, the maker of Some Sweet, and also a nutritional therapist. On this broadcast, we talk about health news and information as it applies to your everyday life. Go ahead and give us a thumbs up if you like this kind of content. Yes, that means like the video. And we want to hear from you. So comment if you have something that you want to share with us. And subscribe to all of our social medias. And now, on to the broadcast.
Well, hello. Hello, everyone. Hello. Welcome to today's broadcast. I am TL Matthew. Again, I am the founder of Some Foods, the maker of Some Sweet. And, I always like to say that Some Sweet is the most spectacular sweetener there is on the market. I'm going to share the screen with that product there. Matter of fact, I'll just take a gander at that. And it's the most spectacular sweetener on the market. And I like to always say that Some Sweet is what helped me to kick my sugar addiction. I'm also a nutritional therapist. Nutritional therapist. The name of my practice is SARE, which stands for Sugar Addiction is Real, and it's very real. And I think that a lot of us don't really, we haven't realized that as of yet. But I think once you try and kick the habit, then we find out, yeah, that it is really real. So, but anyway, I wanted to just go ahead and jump in here because I want to try and keep these broadcasts down to like 30 minutes. And I know that we're real informal here, but I want them to be educational. I want to get as much information out to you all as possible and keep all the rest of the chit chat down. So the subject matter that was chosen for today is, as you can see, there is just flashing across the screen, is how, okay, is how you can change your DNA to look younger. So we're talking about, making yourself look younger, kind of reversing the aging process or slowing it down. Is it possible? Well, let's just jump on into the science and find out. So part of the reason why I thought about this was because I this is really timely too. So part of the reason why I thought about it was because a lot of times most people think that I'm younger unless they can see, which is it's appropriate for today. It's like I don't know how to show it because be looking at the camera. So my gray is showing today, but when my gray isn't showing, then people, it's always people think that they tend to think that I'm younger, and because I do have a younger child, so I don't necessarily get the grandmotherly thing. But then, even throughout all this process of aging, there was something that used to be kind of like a joke. Like my brother would say, "Yeah, all that good Christian living, that's what's keeping you young or making you, look young. The prayers and the good Christian living and all of that." So that was kind of like a joke about, why I always would present as younger. And so, and then today, I was looking at a study on genetics. Well, not DNA. Um, with the 23andMe and the whatever the other DNA where they swab you, or the little tube or whatever, and check your DNA, find trace your DNA back to see where you come from. And this lady, she was on there, and she said she was, what did she say she was? She was 60. She was 64, I think, when she started her DNA, her journey, ancestry, looking at her ancestry. And she said she was raised white, but she found out that she was black, right? That her biological father was a black man. And so when she said she was 60 something, I was like, maybe that was a mistake. Or I'm like, but when you're having your own conversation and you're talking to somebody, you're not usually making mistakes like that. So then the lady asked her to repeat it, and then and then she said it, yeah, and then she mentioned the year she was born, which I think was about 1952. And I was like, wow. And then they went down into I went down into the comments to see. It was like, how old is this lady? And I mean, she looked fantastic. I mean, like literally. And not saying that 60 that every 60-year-old or 60-plus-year-old looks 60 plus years old or whatever, but she really was like, it was really shocking given the complexion of her skin, because as a white woman, and I think that's the reason why people took it like that, because we always say black don't crack, which really ain't true, because they do crack, but maybe just a little slower. But oh, I think Facebook is notifying me that somebody um, sent me a message. Okay. But given the fact that she was a Caucasian lady, or assumed to have been Caucasian, and her very youthful appearance, it yeah, given that her very youthful appearance, that you know, it was just shocking, given her complexion and all of that. So, and I thought, wow, well, that's really timely, because I thought that would, because that's what I already had planned on talking about today, was how can you change your DNA to look younger? And what are the things that affect your DNA to cause you to age? Because it's kind of thought of that you can't change your DNA. And if you see me looking, you always know that I'm looking at my notes and all of that good stuff. So let me jump in here and bring up my notes. Bring up my notes here. So, because like I think maybe in eighth grade science you learn about DNA. I don't know where you all went to school at, or when you learned about science, but it's probably about eighth grade you learn about your DNA, and that you learn that it's fixed and can't be changed and all of that. But there's some things about DNA that they have, that they're discovering more and more every day. And one of those things is that your genes are modifiable, right? So you can change your DNA. And so your that notion that your genes control your life, that's being replaced with new epigenetic discoveries. So before we go any further, that's in case you haven't heard that term. And I look, and again, I'm not going to say that I'm like fully versed in this, but as part of my studies and training, we did have to study. We did have to go into epigenetics and studies of DNA and all of that as it pertains to nutrition. So I just find it very interesting that that notion is being replaced by new epigenetic studies or discoveries. So, um, for example, when you put stem cells in a petri dish, with the conditions that support muscle growth, those cells are going to evolve, into strong muscles, right? However, if you change the conditions in the petri dish, those same cells are going to become bone cells or fat cells or brain cells. So this is how they're learning about about modifying our genes, right? But so let's see. I'm going to ask us, what is epigenetics? So I'm trying to wait for that screen to pop up. So, what is epigenetics? So, again, like we know that our genes play an important role in our health, but so does our environment. We just discovered that, right? So, if you put those cells in the petri dish, And you give it one condition, it's going to become one thing. You change it, it becomes something else. So we just discovered that. But um, that same thing happens with our behavior, right? So our behaviors and our environment, what we eat, and how physically active we are. Epigenetics is the study of how your behaviors and environment can cause changes that affect the way your genes work. So, so this is unlike genetic changes. Epigenetic changes are reversible and do not change your DNA sequence, but they change how your body reads a DNA sequence. So that's key. So remember, I said earlier that my brother and I, he would joke, "Oh, it's that good Christian living," you know. And then when I saw that lady, I was like, "Wow," you know. The reason I said that was because, and I think a lot of people were taken aback by that, was because we know um, how there's differences in the way that we age between, between races. Like we all age, but the way we look as we age, those kind of things, and how that has an effect. So this lady, appearing to be Caucasian, but actually being a black woman, it was just like, or actually having black, I won't say black DNA, but actually having ancestry, that showed that she had some, that she was, part black, or at least a quarter of her ancestry, I believe. Then that played a huge role in how she was aging, right? So, and I think, given the fact that she probably lived a relatively calm life, because she was expressing that she's trying to get, familiar with her black roots, the black culture. She feels like she hasn't lived the black experience. She lived the white experience. And we talk, you've heard about white privilege. I mean, it's all this stuff. But just imagine if you don't if you have a DNA that, or the structures of your cells that sort of slowly ages, and then you have a peaceful, relatively peaceful life. It's like, free of the stresses that come with being a black person, um, especially here in America, or probably anywhere in the world, free of those stressors. Then just imagine how great you'll look. And she didn't have gray hair either. Now that could be due to the fact that she maybe dyed it or whatever, but, and probably how it was laying on her head, but it didn't look. So just imagine just putting those two together and being able to live a stress free life. Oh wow, you really look great. I mean, I'm just saying. But but even given that, so again, this is how, the epigenetic changes, they're reversible. Doesn't change your DNA sequence, but it changes how your body reads the DNA. So gene expression refers to how often or when proteins are created from the instructions within your genes. So while genetic changes can alter which protein is made, epigenetic changes affect gene expression, and to turn genes on and off. And since your environment and behaviors, such as diet, exercise, can result in epigenetic changes, it is easy to see the connection between your genes and your behaviors and environment. Hence the conversation that we just had previously. So we could go into how that works, um, but it's long and technical, and I don't want to talk about that today. I just want to say, what can we do? How can we change our DNA to look younger? How can we kind of reverse the aging process? What is it that you can do? Well, um, let's look at it a little bit more. So let me see here. So I remember I used to tell people all the time. So, like, I'm highly allergic to phthalates, right? So, it's like I just can't breathe when, if you wear cheap perfume and phthalates and stuff, it's like that. I just have a hard time breathing, right? So, and those are um, phthalates are a toxin, and we don't really know it, the changes that it's causing in our body, because it causes hormonal changes, and I don't want to jump into that, but that's part of the environmental factors. So when you have these things going on, so let's kind of think of your DNA like as computer hardware, right? There's several different types of software programs. That's what's going on with our DNA, and like with the computer, all those different software programs regulate what the hardware does and all that. So epigenetics um, deals with that, the gene expression. So it doesn't change the underlying DNA, but what it does is the software changes and it causes alterations in the gene's function. So the same way that when you put the software on the computer, then now you have all this code and stuff on there, and now you have this program, right, that operates. And all of our programs now are plug and play. Used to didn't be that way. You had to add something, you would have to bring some things in, but now it's plug and play. So that's how it is with our DNA. It's plug and play. So our environment factors such as food, drugs, or exposure to toxins can cause epigenetic changes, causes those changes, and it alters the way that the molecules bind to the DNA. So without going into technical, and then those, it changes the structure of the proteins, and you notice that word proteins, right? It changes the structure of the proteins um, that DNA wraps around. And so those structural changes, they just kind of result in slight changes in gene activity. But they can also produce more dramatic changes by switching genes on when they should be off, and vice versa. And those changes are heritable. So, meaning you can pass those on from from a parent cell to a daughter cell within the body, and from parent to child. And I think there was oh, I cannot remember her name. I remember hearing a social scientist. She was talking about that, some of the inherent DNA changes in the structure for African Americans who experienced slavery. That there's some things that are in our DNA that were passed down because of the trauma that was experienced by our ancestors. And so that same thing would then occur to anybody, to anyone. Whatever occurred with your ancestor will be passed down to you. So I don't want to get into that because I want to talk about the young part, but how do you stay young? But I mean, it's such a fascinating subject, right? Right? Yeah. So, but those changes can be passed on, and so they studied that. When they studied people who were um, they studied that when they studied people who were, um, let's see, like here's a study: the survivors of the Dutch famine during World War II were shown that the effects of epigenetic changes caused by hunger, um, you know, so they got that. But so it says here, I'm going to read it to you. An extraordinary study of survivors of the Dutch famine during World War II, for example, has shown that the effect of epigenetic changes caused by hunger don't show up in the survivors' children, but they do in their children's children. Mm. Um, so they're saying here, this perhaps suggests that the adage should not be merely you are what you eat, but also you are what your grandparents ate. So, see how important that is? So, I mean, I was just like, I was blown away when I was doing research for this. So, there's another thing that talks about that when, uh, just to understand that a person's diet is an important source of epigenetic signals, and scientists are now investigating that. how eating habits modify the gene expression. And so this is important because understanding this relationship, it helps researchers identify nutritional elements. So like there's something like inherent in all of us that this thing is going to cause a problem for us. This might be a trigger for us. And I was just speaking with someone today. We were just had a brief conversation, and I was expressing the fact that when mothers um, don't really realize that if you have high insulin when you're pregnant, that passes on to your child and predispositions your child for type 2 diabetes or high insulin later in life, because your child's insulin is going to be high and things like that. And that's just something that just passes in utero. But and that's just hormonal, right? So just imagine what goes on with the DNA. So understanding that relationship, it helps researchers so they can, figure out how to treat diseases such as obesity, diabetes, coronary artery disease, cancers, and Alzheimer's and things like that. So it's real important um, that we begin to understand the role of nutrition in transgenerational health. And so that's between mother and child. And epigenetics impacts cells differentiation and shapes how cells function in the long term. So your pregnancy, um, moms, and the old wise women used to say, they wanted to keep the mother calm. They wanted to feed her good. They, no, don't look at anything shocking or scary or anything like that. And we've in our modern time began to call these things wives' tales, but I think that they were on to something back then. So it's understand that we under I mean it's important that we understand how nutrition during pregnancy may impact generations multiple generations. So even with that, how do we stay looking young? Because if we do it for ourselves, right, so if we're trying to do it for ourselves, well, if you're past your childbearing years, then yeah, you've already done whatever's going to do to affect your generations, unfortunately. But there's always someone you can share it with, right? So let's look at what we can do to go beyond the petri dish and see how we can change our genetic expression. Because remember, it's not only what you eat, but it's also your environment. So and so let's look at that. So the if if we look at what they discovered was they looked at things like yoga, meditation, and mindful breathing. And they did over 100 studies, and they found that these activities can influence your genes and the rate at which you get older. Haha. Yeah. There was so much in this. It was so meaty that I was just like, oh wow, everywhere to go with this. But yeah, so that's it. There's a connection between yoga or meditation, prayer, and mindful breathing. So that's your environment, right? You're staying peaceful and stuff. Um, there was one study that was conducted by Harvard a few years ago, and the researchers took blood samples before and after these activities, and they noticed that 2,209 genes responsible for the aging process, were turned off. Yeah, I know I said all that other stuff just to get to this. Be at peace. Be at peace. Yoga, meditation, prayer, and mindful breathing, right? That turns off your aging genes. So genes that protect cells against damage caused by free radicals were turned on. So see, it turned off the genes responsible for aging and turned on the genes responsible for protecting the cells against free radicals. And genes that promote oxidative stress, which accelerates aging, were turned off. So this is fantastic. This is, I mean, like this is great news. being at peace, right? When you're at peace, you're turning, you're able to, you empower your body, right? Your genes, your DNA, to turn off the genes that cause aging, and you turn on the genes that fight for you, that protect your cells against free radicals, and you turn off the genes that cause extra stress, oxidative stress, that accelerates aging. So they also tested subjects. They had them to practice relaxing activities for 20 minutes a day. Some did yoga, others listened to simple meditation audio, and the activity didn't matter. The underlying It's the underlying mechanism triggered by these activities. So scientists called it the relaxation response. Relax, relax. So, so scientists call it the relaxation response, which causes decreased oxygen consumption, increased exhale nitric oxide, and reduced psychological distress. So being at peace. Isn't that, I mean, I just find that that's amazing, right? And so it sounds like really simple. It sounds super simple, but it's so powerful. It's so powerful. And if you practice those things, yoga or meditation, prayer, all of that, you're going to enjoy better health. Not because not because you're lucky, but because you've been positively influencing your genes, right? And this is done by science, right? So this is science. This is science telling us that. So here's a summary of the Harvard study. So 19 adults were long-term daily practitioners of various relaxation response. 20 were trained in RR eliciting techniques, that's breathing, mindfulness, and meditation CDs for 8 weeks during the study. 19 people served as controls. In other words, they did nothing and continued living their normal lives. So, by analysis of blood samples, the study found that 2,209 genes were differently expressed, switched on or off, between the long term meditators and control group. 1,275 genes were upregulated, their activity was increased, and 934 were downregulated, their activity was reduced. In the long term, meditators group. It also found that 1,561 genes were expressed differently between the groups who did the 8 weeks meditation training. The novice meditators, so this is like the people that just got started and were new to it, and the control group. So, and remember, the control group did nothing; they just lived their normal lives. So, particularly 874 were upregulated and 687 were downregulated in the 8 week group. So, in other words, the relaxation response, short or long term, causes hundreds of genes to turn on or off. Many of the enriched genes were involved in the body's response to oxidative stress. Again, oxidative stress produces free radicals. And we can talk about that one day. Free radicals. I think I mentioned that the other day. But oxidative stress produces free radicals, and that promotes a pro inflammatory response and is known to increase vulnerability to viruses and degenerative diseases like cancer. And it also accelerates aging at the cellular level. And so I was going to go into more about the enzymes, but how do you do this? How can you get started? I mean, the study shows that 20 minutes a day is what you would do. Either yoga, meditation, or mindful breathing. and that can slow the aging process. Isn't that awesome? Isn't that fantastic? And I, I'm gonna have someone come on and teach us about the mindful breathing, to talk to us about mindful breathing. What do you guys think about that? What do y'all think about that? Does it sound exciting? Because I'm interested. I'm interested in learning a different breathing technique, or not breathing. I mean, we know how to breathe, right? So we know how to breathe. But this is breathing with relaxation, and for the purposes of relaxation and meditation and things like that. That's important. Um, I'm a singer. For everybody that's a singer, you know how important breathing is. So, and where you breathe from within your body. For everybody that's a singer, you know the keys to that and the importance of that. So, I'm interested in the mindful breathing. So, stay tuned, because I'll have someone come on and share with us about that. Um, Mindful breathing. It can slow down the aging process. That is that. I mean, I just thought that I just loved all this information. I thought, huh, how can you change your DNA? Well, you don't really change your DNA again. You just change the way that your DNA expresses itself, or the way this, you know, you, your underlying DNA stays the same, but the expression changes. And I just think that this is awesome. If we know, because I said that, like, I got all these gray hairs. My son went through a phase, right? And I was like, I swear I got these gray hairs then, you know. That's when I got those gray hairs. And parents say that, right? When your kids are, growing up and they're going through that phase, and like, gray hairs came from that. That's why I think those gray hairs came from. So again, I just want to stress again that we're not just changing we're not changing our DNA, but we're changing how the behaviors of our DNA, right? So the environment is affected by the environment, and it's affected by the food that we eat, and it's affected by, well, yeah, our behaviors, right? So those things are those that's critical, and that's important. So did you get anything out of this? Did you enjoy this today? If so, let me know where you're coming from. Leave me a comment, and let's talk about it below. You got any questions? You got any comments? Anything that you want to say with regard to that? Let's just chat about it. But I just thought it was I thought this was very interesting. The more that if we pay attention to to what the scientists are doing, things that I know people were concerned about, a lot of stuff about the stem cell stuff, but just learning how to relax and relaxing. I mean, they studied that, and they found out that it has a huge effect on how you age, right, at the cellular level. So if you enjoyed this, leave me a comment, like and subscribe, follow me. And with that, I'm going to just go ahead and wrap it up. It's been a pleasure chatting with you all today. Bye bye. Well, that's it for today's broadcast. Want to thank you all for tuning in. Go ahead and give us a thumbs up if you like this type of content. Also, comment and subscribe to all of our social medias. Peace and blessings.